Welcome, everybody. James, shall we start?
Yeah, we'll go and get started. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. My name is James Stukes. I serve as the coordinator of college access and student success at Wofford College. I also serve as a member of Wofford College's 2021 virtual Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Celebration Committee. As a committee, the Wofford College Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Celebration Committee has a social responsibility to acknowledge the historical context in which Wofford currently exists. As a result, we acknowledge that we gather as institution of higher learning on the ancestral lands of indigenous peoples, past and present, and honor with gratitude the land itself, and thank enrolled members of the Cherokee Nation and their tribes for their involvement in helping the college learn more about the people who are stewards of the land Wofford currently occupies. We also acknowledge the enslaved Africans who labored to lay the physical foundations of the college. As a result, the committee commits to actively engaging in learning about the history of lands we occupy, how to better be stewards of it, and continue to honor with intention and respect the historical and current significance of indigenous and enslaved peoples who suffered in the creation of the college and who are credited for its current existence. Once again, thank you all for joining today's session. This year, the college's Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. celebration theme is keeping the same energy. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. A special thanks goes to Dean Taifa Alexander for her leadership in this year's MLK celebration and for providing the draft for this. We are honored to have with us tonight Councilwoman Erica Brown and Councilwoman Megan Smith of Spartanburg as we discuss the intersections of politics and social justice as it relates to the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The flow of tonight's discussion will begin with a brief introduction of our panelists, followed by a series of scripted questions. As the discussion portion concludes, questions from participants will be asked if time permits. As attendees, if you have any questions, please submit those questions to me privately using the chat feature. I will make every effort to answer as many questions as possible. However, we may not be able to get to every question. As a final logistic note, in order to have a productive conversation, any attendee who is engaging in disrespectful, harassing, or racist behavior will be removed from the session. I will now turn things over to my co-host, Dr. Begonia Caballero, who will introduce our panelists and moderate this evening's questions.
Okay, hello, everybody. I am Dr. Begoña Caballero, and I'm an associate professor of Spanish at Wofford College and a member of the Wofford College's 2021 virtual Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Celebration Committee. And I sincerely thank our attendees for participating this evening and our panelists, Erica Brown and Megan Smith, for their time in helping to make our MLK Celebration Week a success. And I'm gonna go ahead with the introductions. I'm gonna introduce Ms. Brown and then Ms. Smith. So Ms. Brown is a former South Carolina State Player of the Year from Beaufort, South Carolina, and Wofford College class of 2000 graduate. She was elected to City Council as a political newcomer in 2013 and represents District 6, which includes most of the city's north side and portion of Beaumont, Mills, and downtown. Ms. Brown also serves on the city's Hospitality Tax Grants Advisory Committee, Partners for Active Living Trails Committee, Northside Advisory Board, Spartanburg Convention Visitors Bureau Advisory Board, USC Upstate Foundation Board, and the Chapman Cultural Center Advisory Board. Ms. Brown is currently employed with St. Luke's Free Medical Clinic as the manager of support services. Her hobbies include cooking, live music, sports, hiking, and spoiling her fur babies Winston, Duran, and Cletus. So I'm gonna introduce Councilwoman Megan Smith. Ms. Megan Smith is the City Council representative for District 1 in the city of Spartanburg. She represents the west side of the city, She has just completed her first year of city council. Megan grew up in Ecuador, South Carolina, and moved to South Carolina in high school. She graduated from Stanford University and received a master's from Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary. Megan serves as the Director of College and Career Readiness at the Spartanburg Academic Movement. She is the mom of 4 boys. Okay, so we're gonna start with questions. We're gonna start with the first question, and Erica Brown, Councilwoman Erica Brown, is gonna respond, and then Megan Smith, and then we'll alternate the order. So, first question is, how did you get involved in local governance? Was serving as an elected official a goal early in life?
Absolutely not. And I want to apologize in advance to everyone for my voice right now, battling a little bit of laryngitis. Being an elected official never even crossed my mind. In fact, I moved to Spartanburg in 1996 and attended Wofford. And, really, when I think back to how Wofford is today versus when I was there, there was a lot less community engagement. And so, everyone called what you called the Wofford bubble. So I really didn't have access to the community around me and didn't have any idea of what Spartanburg was truly like. Fast forward to graduating and actually, being a part of a regular citizen within Spartanburg, you get an idea and a better grasp of really what's truly going on in your community. So for me, it really wasn't anything that I had really given a lot of thought to, but at the time there was a representative for that district that had been there for a number of years. She'd been there for 20 years and had ran unopposed. I was involved in a lot of local organizations, arts organizations and such. And for me, it was really about wanting to raise my voice on a bigger platform and how can I contribute more to the society and to the community that basically has embraced me and adopted me for over 20 years. So, it was kind of a long shot. Oftentimes in politics, people go with the familiar face, the familiar name and what they know. But I was able to, knock on a lot of doors and talk to a lot of people about what the needs were of the community. And you didn't really have anything to lose and ran. I think oftentimes, with our politicians these days, they get very complacent in their roles. They become very disengaged. And I think that the community then at that time was just looking for something different. So lo and behold, I'm in my second term, finishing out my second term this year, actually. So hope to serve a little bit more time within city, local government. Of course, at the end of the day, it's the will of the people.
So thank you, Begonia and James and the Wofford community for having me here tonight. I see many familiar faces that I haven't seen in a while, so it's great to see y'all. And I will also apologize in advance. As Begonia said, I'm the mom of 4 boys, and there's some new Fortnite thing that came out tonight, and I can hear them all screaming. And I've retreated to the garage. So if they come in here and if you can hear World War III happening, that's because that is happening on the other side of the garage door. But I think, as opposed to Erica, I always did want to go into politics in some sort of way. I first ran for office in 7th grade to be the class president. And, the boys just didn't think that a girl should do that. And I remember being hailed as a feminazi when I was doing that. And lo and behold, today we now have our first woman vice president, which is so exciting. And then I also did student government in college. I ran as a senator at Samford University, and then used that experience to be a Supreme Court justice for our judiciary branch at Samford. And I got into politics here really through the city's social media, which if you don't follow the city's Twitter account or Facebook or Instagram, then you really should. Not only is it a wealth of knowledge of what's going on in the city, but it's so funny. And there was a tweet that went out about Halloween. And do we trick or treat on Halloween, even if it's on a Wednesday, or is trick or treating going to be on the weekend? And it was just the snarkiest and funniest response. And I started then listening to the city podcast, which they also have. And it was, I love to tell the story, but it was right after, it was the Thanksgiving after the 2016 election. And they were doing a podcast on getting involved at the local level. And they were saying, take the energy that you have, whatever that might be, and transfer that to local government. And so I was so moved by that podcast and that invitation that I just walked into City Hall and said, here I am, you invited us to come and get involved. I have no clue what to do, but use me. And I started to make relationships with people. I first served with Erica on the Hospitality Tax Committee, so I was able to get appointed to a committee. And I had thought about running, but the timing didn't feel right until the person who held the office before me. There were several key votes that I really disagreed with. And Spartanburg, local politics can be notorious for unopposed elections, and people, like Erica mentioned, people just running and no one running against them. And I remember walking out of a particular city council meeting and saying, okay, the time is now, it's sooner than I might have thought, but I can't in good conscience allow this person to be unchallenged. So that's how I got involved.
Okay, thank you both. So the next question, starting with Megan, is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. left a lasting legacy and was a true model for how society should act to address social injustices. What do you most admire about his legacy, and how has it impacted your professional perspective?
I thought this was such a good question. And when I think about Dr. King's legacy, I think too often we want to diminish that to a meme that gets shared on our Instagram account, and we'll say, you know, hate is too hard of a burden to bear, I've chose love. And we've I think whitewashed him in a lot of ways and haven't spent a whole lot of time really challenging ourselves with his words and what he would say to us now if he were still alive. But I think today is such a wonderful demonstration of his legacy. We have now our first woman of color Black president. We have a Black pastor from Atlanta who's now Georgia's first senator, which is something that, you know, I think the people who marched with Dr. King probably couldn't have imagined. But the policy changes that he called for have brought us to today. But we also see that just 2 weeks ago that white supremacy is not dead in this country. And the flag that has been used throughout our history to promote white supremacy and white nationalism was in our capital just 2 weeks ago. And so while we've seen so many advancements, it's such a clear reminder of how much further we have to go. But I try to read Dr. King's letter from Birmingham jail every year. It's kind of a tradition that I've started. And you asked us how has his legacy impacted us. And I think I've been most impacted by the part in his letter where he talks about the white moderate. Many of you, I'm sure, have discussed this in your own classes. And if it's okay, I have just that snip of the letter that I wanted to read. He says, I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in the stride toward freedom is not the white citizens counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I can't agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically feels that he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by the myth of time and who constantly advises the Negro to wait until a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. And I think of all the things that I've read, that is the piece that sticks with me the most. And I think we can all identify both times in ourselves that we as white people have been that, you know, oh, but what about the looting? And what about the riots this summer? And we're so afraid of tension and anything that doesn't appear to be law and order when we don't realize, well, what is missing when that's what we call for. So I try to remember as well when thinking about his legacy that he was a hated man. You know, he was considered by the FBI the most dangerous Negro for the future of our nation. He was assassinated. And that is a reminder to me that the pursuit of social justice, you will oftentimes be reviled. And in political office, like Erica said, that can mean losing your seat. That can mean burning through your political capital quickly. But to maintain the status quo, which Dr. King so often talked about, I think is to maintain a racist system. And so his legacy, to get to the point, challenges me to not be that white moderate and to continue to challenge the status quo with the acceptance and realization that that's not always going to be the most popular opinion of the day.
Thank you, Megan. And the same question go for Councilwoman Erica Brown, and is what do you most admire about Dr. King's legacy and how has it impacted your professional perspective?
Well, I'm probably going to be a little bit shorter than you, Megan, but I think for me, it was his refusal to stay silent about things that he believed in. He was, to me, very rooted in his message for the pursuit of justice and equality. So much, in fact, as Megan pointed out, it cost him his life. And so I think, we're 50 years far removed from his assassination, and you still look at the society in which we live in today, and in a way, I feel like we are still very far removed from his message. He dedicated his life advocating for racial and economic equality. And I think for me as a professional, and what I have done and how it's impacted me on a professional level, the work that I do today, the work within the medical clinic that I do today and providing, healthcare, the very basic needs that I feel very, very strongly about, that every citizen resident in this country deserves, in order to, lift themselves up out of, poverty. To me, healthcare is a right. And so I think when I look at all of the work that he did, he's very, very vocal in that his message is, you continue to speak up for the things that you believe in. I've oftentimes in certain roles of city council or opinions that I may have, you may get a note or a nod of disappointment because, we have been so centered in, as Megan said, the status quo of our communities, and people don't like change. When you're shifting the roots of change in your community, that also shifts, a level of power that white people are truly not willing to give up. And so, for me, it's about, working towards a more equitable and just community that we live in. So for me, for him, as far as that's concerned, it was really, to me, his legacy stood out that much for me as far as, him just continuing to fight for the things that he believed in. And, oftentimes, I've been asked before, well, do you get nervous about, threats that could be made? People don't think that even happens on a local level, but it does happen on a local level. And, me personally, I'm willing to die for the cause if that's what it takes, because, I believe in justice and equality for everyone, and it's not selective. And so, hopefully no one takes that as an invitation, but I truly believe in that.
Okay, thank you both. So now we're actually going to move to the local level. And here is the next question for Erika first. As the representative for your respective districts, and thinking about the policies that you have created or supported in Spartanburg, which ones do you feel the proudest and less proud about, and why? Is there something you would have done different?
It took me a few minutes to think about that question. I think the most proud efforts that we have made was the vote for the indoor pool at the Dr. T.K. Gregg Community Center. It's probably one of the most controversial votes and issues that we have had in our community since I came on to council. It was a close vote, if you will. But the reason for me is that what I love about our city is that we put our people first, and that we invest in people so that we can create a more equitable community. That vote was very, very controversial, but to me, it meant a lot, even from a personal level. 64% of Black children in this country cannot swim. That's 3 times higher than those of their white peers. And so that was an issue to me. There was a lot of argument between, the funding. There's about I believe it was an $8 million difference between the outdoor pool versus the indoor pool. But I think that also ties into, the statistic about Black children versus white children and their abilities to swim also ties into this whole system of institutional racism and racial segregation. You look at that through, privatization of swimming lessons and swimming pools. When you look back into the days of the civil rights, the municipal pools, and segregation, Black folks didn't have an opportunity to do that. So for me, I would say, I fought very, very hard for that. There were a few plans about how do we go about it. I'm very much not interested, and I'm really interested in making sure that we raise the bar for our communities. And so I would say that was probably the most proud moment for me. I got a lot of flack for that, from a financially responsible, we can't afford it, that sort of argument. But the reality is that we could afford it. It's going to be, the approach was a little bit longer term in terms of the loan that the city was going to have to take out. But, most of the complaints through that were really coming from community members that are the haves. And, for me, I've always thought about and been raised to fight for the have-nots. So that was my proudest moment. I would say that my least proudest moment would probably be the new housing development that's been developed over at the former Silver Hill church location, which sits on the backside of the Chapman Cultural Center. And it's not personal, but I think as we continue to look at our community through an equitable lens, that particular area to me has now become very exclusive, and it ties into a center of downtown. I've always want to look at ways that we can expand upon affordable housing for our communities, and that was a vote that I regret looking back. The price tags for those homes, and what it's turned out to be for me is not really what I envisioned it to be. And sometimes you learn those lessons. You learn those hard lessons, and I'm not afraid to say, that was my bad. And that was a vote that I regret, and but I'm learning more about that, and I know better next time, if there is a next time.
Yeah. So the same questions, just as a reminder, was thinking of your policies that you have created or supported in Spartanburg. Which ones do you feel the proudest and less proud about, and why? And if there is something you would have done different. Megan?
So Erica's had 7 years at this. I just finished my first year. And if you would have told me in January that, I would have experienced everything that we had to go through this past year, my first year in office, I probably wouldn't have believed you. We started out with the tornado, and then we had COVID, which we're still obviously dealing with. And then of course, everything that happened this summer with the death of George Floyd and the protests that erupted across really the entire world. And I think the thing that I'm most proud of in my short time so far was working really hard on a resolution that we passed unanimously back in September, which I actually was thinking about, what can we do? What can a statement be that we can make as a city? And I participated in a few of the talks that Wofford hosted this summer about racism. And there was one that Dr. Kim Roston was on, and she was talking about different movements across the world, South Africa, obviously the Holocaust. And she talked about the importance of apologies in that healing. And I texted her as she was talking, and I said, we need to do that here in Spartanburg. Let's get together and talk. And so over lots of conversations and several weeks, we were the first city, and still the only one that I know of, in South Carolina to pass a resolution that apologized for the city's role in creating inequitable outcomes that we see across our city. And the city, Spartanburg, if you live here, or if you're a college student, I could understand if you don't realize this, but we really are the most progressive city, I think, in the state. The things that we have done. Erica led the movement for us to be the first city to have the Black Lives Matter mural painted. She did an incredible job recruiting the artists and the funding, so bravo, Erica, for that. But when we passed that resolution, owning our role, we're talking a lot about unity right now as a country. And we saw just 2 weeks ago, some of the very people that incited that violence calling us to be unified. I think that can only happen when the one who has committed the wrong recognizes that role and apologizes and asks for forgiveness and pledges to do things differently. And we as a city did that. We received a standing ovation after that vote, and it was a beautiful moment. There hasn't been a vote that I regret yet. Maybe I need some time to see things play out. There are things I would have done differently, just some constituent level needs. But I think as well, we have seen a real movement of people getting involved in these issues. And I think I haven't done the best job at explaining my votes to some of my own allies, if that makes sense. I think we can often see within the progressive community, someone referred to it as like a circular firing squad, that we don't give each other the grace enough times to realize and appreciate the different roles that we play, and how we're all on the same team shooting for playing the long game. I think there's been times that I've been short-sighted and haven't sought to really maintain some of those relationships in ways that maybe I feel like I should have, if that makes sense.
Okay, of course it does. Thank you both. So this question is going to be first for Megan, Councilwoman Megan, and then Councilwoman Erica Brown. So one of Dr. Martin Luther King's famous quotes is, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." How would you interpret and apply this quote in 2021 and within the Spartanburg community?
So that line also comes from the letter from Birmingham jail. And again, you all have probably read this, but he's responding to a letter from a group of white pastors who have written to him saying that they disagree with his timing, they disagree with his methods, you know, he's breaking the law. And so he is responding to them from the prison jail. And I wanted to just, again, read the larger context in which that quote comes from. And it's at the very beginning of the letter. He says, "I'm cognizant of the interrelatedness of all communities and states. I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affect one directly affects all indirectly," which I think is the theme of all of y'all's MLK events this year. So to me, I think that quote really strikes to the heart of equity. You know, we talk about the difference between equality, which is everyone receives the same thing, but the difference with equity is everyone receives what they need. Just like Erica gave the perfect practical example of the indoor pool. And for in Erica's neighborhood, a whole lot more financial investment, more development, more community partners coming together than they have in my district. But that's because her district needed that, and outcomes that we were seeing for people and families in her district were different. Spartanburg is like a 30-mile radius town. I mean, we're small geographically, but we have a census tracts that have a 17-year life expectancy difference in census tracts that abut each other. And of course, one is a poor Black census tract and the other one is a wealthy white census tract. And that's not okay. And so we have to realize that to have the outcomes that will benefit the whole city means that we need to invest heavily and deeply and intentionally to the areas.
Megan, you're breaking up.
Need it.
Okay, now you're okay.
Leading the state conversations. Oh, is my Zoom okay?
Yes.
Okay, maybe.
You're fine now.
Okay. Sorry, it said my internet was unstable. But one thing that our assistant city manager says is that our city is only as strong as our weakest neighborhood. You know, we know that expression. Is only as strong as its weakest link, and I don't like with a neighborhood or with an individual. But for a certain census tract in our city to have a 17-year life expectancy difference, that's an injustice. And when we view ourselves as all knitted together in the mutual garment of destiny, we can see beyond our individual selves, which I think is something that makes us uniquely American, our individualism. And I think it's
Megan, you're breaking up again.
Part of our Achilles heel. I have to move into the house. I'll end and let Erica go.
Okay, thank you, Megan. So the question was about the quote, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere," and how would you interpret and apply this quote in 2021 and within the Spartanburg community? Erika.
Well, I kind of see it as, you know, our founding principles are based on, you know, freedom and equality. But I don't see that in alignment with our history. You know, a history which has been deeply rooted in suppression and systemic racism and segregation of, you know, Black and brown communities and our Indigenous folks. So for me, what I kind of see it is that our justice system is really truly based on, one bias. We saw, not long ago, this past summer, those who participated in the BLM protests were treated completely different than those who participated in the insurrection on our nation's capital. I mean, we had thousands, I think, and upwards of 10,000, BLM protesters, arrested over this past summer through all of the protests, the Breonna Taylor, the George Floyd, all of these protests across the country. And we saw an upwards of, 10,000 arrests from these folks, from law enforcement all across the country. Whereas, I haven't really been keeping up with the numbers of arrests for those that participated in what I saw as an act of domestic terrorism on our nation's capital. We might be looking at maybe 100 at this point. Just by all accounts and watching the events unfold on television, you could see that there were thousands of people there that were participating in that act on our capital. So, I kind of see it as that, where we come in as a society is to make sure that we are actually fighting towards justice and equality for all. Because right now there are two different justice systems in this country. You could equate that to, even, white folks versus Black men who have been charged with possession of marijuana. That the arguments could be, there's a long list that you could make of social injustice when it comes to, law enforcement and our true justice system. So I feel like, that's kind of how I see it. And I kind of, this might be a little bit controversial, but, you could also apply it to, during the time when we had the BLM protests, we had our very own law enforcement leader of the county, who came out and spoke. This would be Sheriff Chuck Wright, and basically alienated those that were out marching for equality and justice, and truly not recognizing and acknowledging that there are two different justice systems. I think there was a lot of controversy. There was an incident where two young Black men were, riding in a car, and I believe there was a gun that was discharged from the vehicle. And some of the comments that he made, which were just completely insensitive, but, basically indicating that, his officers had a right to kill those two Black men in their vehicles. So I think that that's kind of where we are and we continue to be. And so we, it just doesn't, our founding principles really don't fall in line with our, the history of our country at this point. We still have a lot of work to do, but hopefully by the time, the end is near for me, we'll get there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you both. So the next question is gonna go to Councilwoman Brown first, and it's about what we have been talking about, the Black Lives Movement, and so there has been this younger generation that has an impact on issues of social injustice, voter turnout, and overall civic engagement. So what advice would you give college students, like the ones who are listening and who are here with us, and residents of Spartanburg who are wanting to get more involved in the making of a more equitable and just society?
Well, getting involved, we're seeing it. We are seeing it finally, because I don't know if young people know this, but for the most part, most old people are ready to hand the torch. And so, we're seeing that in our community. We're seeing more engagement now than I think I've seen since I've been on council. We're seeing more folks get involved with their neighborhood associations. We're seeing more people join a city board or a commission, or getting involved with the local citizens advisory councils, so that they can, learn about how our local government governs. Volunteering for campaigns. I had a number of people knocking on my doors, these last few years, dating back to 2018, speaking at local meetings, but also educating yourself on the demographics of your community. We're just above, a little bit higher than 50%, Black citizens in this community. People don't really, I don't think people realize that or understand that, because, they tend to kind of just live within their own neighborhood, if you will. So, really is recognizing, you figure out what the issues are that matter to you, and educating yourself, in your community, and just getting involved. I know that's very, very cliche to say, but that's really, truly the best way you can learn, and have more of an impact in the community that you actually live in.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So the same question goes to Councilwoman Megan, and is what would advice you would give to college students and residents of Spartanburg who would like to get more involved in the making of a more equitable and just society?
Yeah, I agree with everything that Erica said. It's hard to sometimes know how to get involved or where to plug in. And I think you can get involved in some harmful ways to the community, especially, white people, when we come in and we think we're going to be the white savior, whether we articulate that to ourselves or not. I think a lot of times we can come in with this patronizing attitude of, oh, I go to Wofford, I'm getting my, degree in psychology, and I, studied all these things about all these things. And so I think taking the stance of a learner is a really important stage, and probably the first stage that you should take. Spartanburg has a wealth of data. I work for an organization that's all that we do, really, that's not all we do. A lot of what we do, education data. And so really, like Erica just said, really getting to know that community, wherever you're thinking about doing it. And then I think a thing I've learned later in life is, I think there's two tracks to this work. There's the direct service work, where you are actually, like what Erica does for her job, you are boots on the ground, serving individuals, usually in some sort of nonprofit type organization. And then there's the systemic work, which is looking at it from a bird's eye view. You're oftentimes, and that's what I do in my role, I'm not working directly with students, but I'm trying to see, okay, how is our education system built to get these outcomes that we're seeing, and how do we change the system with policies or through culture? And that's a different track, and there's different ways to get involved, I think, in each one, whichever is kind of more of your passion. If you're interested in politics, and I think we're going to talk about this in the next question, but come to city council meetings, go to county council meetings, show up, learn Robert's rules, volunteer on campaigns. There is almost nothing more valuable than someone who will say, I will give you 3 hours of my Sunday afternoon to knock on doors. Erica, I don't know if I've ever told you this or not, but I read about your win in the paper 7 years ago. And the article they did was about how you went door to door. That was your strategy. It wasn't so much the mailers or the yard signs or the fancy advertisements. It was just getting face-to-face time. And I remember when I decided to run, I'm like, I'm going to use the Erica Brown strategy. I can't outraise my opponent, but I can certainly knock on more doors than him. And so if there's a college student, we're going to have a county council election in March. And we have no woman serving on county council and there's a woman that's running. And so if that's something you want to get involved in, you know, reach out to Erica or myself and we would love to plug you in. Erica would love to have any of you helping her as she runs again in November. So there's all sorts of different ways, I think, finding what your talent is. And then I'd also say, find the people you want to do this work with. Because it can be lonely. It can feel isolating. You can sometimes feel like you're the only one in your friend group or on your floor or in your classes that believes these things. I promise you're not the only one, but find that group of people that can encourage you and lift you up, because this is hard work.
Thank you. Thank you both. So our next question is, although Dr. Martin Luther King's effort helped to propel the civil rights movement, he faced severe obstacles, primarily due to his race and beliefs. Have you experienced any types of micro or macroaggressions or discrimination because of your gender, race, and or beliefs? What lessons were you able to take away from those experiences?
So I am a straight white woman. As a white person, you know, I reap privilege upon privilege in this country. As a woman, you know, I think we can all, any woman who's listening tonight can say that there's been instances in which you have been stereotyped or sidelined or not considered, or had your thoughts plagiarized by someone else. You know, we could have a whole separate Zoom call about those type of things. So I'm more interested in Erica's perspective on this question, but I'll just say when I went to my opponent to tell him I was running, hoping he would maybe say, oh, it's time for me to pass the torch. Like Erica said, most older people want to do. This guy did not. But his question to me was, well, who would take care of my children? And what did my ex-husband and my dad think? And I just, I was, you know, I wasn't surprised because I knew him. But there were several times that while campaigning that I would get those type of comments, you know, Facebook messages from people I didn't know telling me that I was a bad mom, or that, you know, I was giving my children away to be raised by someone else for wanting to go into this field. And I can bet you no man gets those kind of statements. So, but I recognize fully that as a white person, you know, my path toward these things is much easier than women of color.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're, you know, we see it every day. You know, you hear the comment, the old age comment, you know, well, I don't see color, or, you know, we're all one race. You know, I actually was asked a few years ago by a white male colleague of mine what my intentions were as far as, you know, future political intentions beyond city council, if anything. You know, and I said, I'm not really sure. I'm weighing all my options. You know, right now my focus is on city council, which is the seat that I'm in right now. And he just kind of jibed, you know, and well, you know, you think you're going to run for mayor? And I said, well, I don't know. I haven't made a decision. And he was like, I bet you'll run for mayor just because you just want to be the first Black woman mayor for the city of Spartanburg. And I looked at him because, you know, I often feel like, you know, when people just assume, so, I mean, you can tell, you may not can tell, but I am a biracial woman. And I feel as if I don't claim that, I somehow take away from my own mother, who birthed me and raised me for a very short time on her own and went through a lot to do that. And so, you know, I explained to him, and I called him by his name very firmly. And I said, I'll let you know, but at the same time, if I do run for office beyond my role where I am now, it's because I want to continue to make our community better. You know, it has nothing to do with, you know, me being a female. So I've dealt with that. You know, I also, when I attended Wofford, you know, I'm a military brat, so I didn't grow up in very privileged family. We didn't have, you know, an extra home to go to for the summer. But oftentimes when I tell people that I attended Wofford, you know, their first response is, oh, did you go on a scholarship? So dealing with that, you know, all the time, you know, I just kind of take it with a grain of salt at this point. But one of the things that I do in a way to try to not be confrontational is that what I have learned is that it's really important to always respond. And, you know, whether you respond immediately or you respond at a later time, it's important to respond. You know, it's important to correct people and educate them. You know, you have to decide whether it be in the present moment or a later moment, what's most important to you. I think sometimes if you decide to do it at a later moment, you then run the risk of being gaslighted. When you approach that person about what they said a few days earlier, you know, they all of a sudden they don't remember making that comment, and they, you know, jump to the, you know, the defensive side, and then it just becomes this sort of back and forth, and how I have made that person feel because I didn't address it with them immediately. So for me, it's, you know, the lessons that I take away from those experiences is to always respond. But I think for each individual person, you know, you just have to decide whether you should do it sooner or later.
Okay, thank you. I mean, if somebody has one question, we may have time maybe for one question. You can send it to James Stuck. I know that at this point there are no questions, so I'm gonna go ahead with the last questions, and maybe you want to answer, you know, with a few words in case there is a question from the audience tonight. Women have always played a crucial role in the governance of this country, but for a long period were not allowed a seat at the table. Fast forward to earlier today, as we have mentioned, we witnessed Kamala Harris become the first woman to hold the office of vice president, and the first African American and first Asian American to serve in this role. What advice would you communicate to other women who have aspirations of running for an elected position?
Well, you know, after 2018, you know, we saw a surge of women running for local office, state. But we still have a very long way to go. You know, women, you know, represent over half of the population. But yet we still are missing a lot of seats at the table when it comes to, you know, issues that truly affect us. You know, I would say if you decide to, you know, run for an elected position, you know, to do it for the right reasons. It's not easy work, but I certainly don't do it for any sort of title or accolade. I do it because I truly want to make an impact on my community. You know, make sure that you have a broad network of support. That's really, really important. You know, my first time running for office, I had support from the, I guess maybe the financial piece. But as Megan said, I knocked on a lot of doors. But, you know, you get the words of encouragement and such, but, you know, when you're a newcomer, you still aren't quite sure about what you need to do. So making sure that you have a broad network of support is really important. And finding out, you know, what's important to your community. Find out what's important to your particular constituents in the districts that you live in. You know, be authentic. Don't make promises you know that you cannot keep. But yeah, just finding out what's important to those that live around you. You know, less is more. You know, I ran on, you know, 4 specific issues that I wanted to change. in the hopes that, we would get there. And then, in another 4 years, we would look towards a few other items. People don't really realize, and I learned this very, very quickly coming onto council, is that, things don't happen. You would think, well, you live in a small community, things should happen pretty quickly if you want it to happen. And it truly doesn't. There still is a lot of red tape on a local level too, so.
Okay, so same question for Megan, and I think we have one short question that we're gonna hope to answer before time is over. So if you can be brief, Megan. You're muted.
Sorry. I agree with everything that Erica said. I think it's really important to have realistic expectations. If you're a woman running, you're going to get the comments. You're going to have people talk about your clothes. If you're a mom, you're going to have people ask you where your kids are or who's babysitting them. But that is by no means a reason not to do it. I think it's really important. Someone asked me, why do you want to run? And I answered with the question of why I wanted to serve. Well, I want to impact my community. I want to, get these policy changes. And they said, no, that's not what I asked you. I asked you why you wanted to run. And I think those are two different answers. And you have to define what success is for you. If your only goal is to get elected, well, then that's okay. But you might not meet your goal. If your goal is to challenge an opponent, if your goal is to run so that you can talk about the issues that you want to talk about, because when you run, you have a megaphone that you wouldn't normally. And so using that smartly and just kind of defining what success is for you, but then also realizing that as we all kind of chip away at that glass, might not break for you, but one day it's going to break for someone behind you. And I've seen all the memes today, watch out, ladies, there's glass everywhere today, which is really exciting.
Okay, and I'm going to pass it to co-host James Stooks now.
Thank you very much for our esteemed panelists for just providing that knowledgeable information about Spartanburg and for your testimony and standing in your truth. I think today, tonight's event definitely a wonderful cap to a powerful, momentous day for this country and for all Americans. So thank you again for your time this evening. We have two questions I'm gonna try to toss in really quickly. The first one is, how can folks contact you directly, Councilwoman Brown and Smith? If you don't know if you have a Twitter handle, or what's the best method of contact?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Megan.
Yeah, I'm on all of the platforms except, I don't know, TikTok or something. It's my children. I'm happy to throw my email in the chat if that would be easier. People could write it down from there, but email, Facebook, Twitter, whatever you prefer.
Yeah, same thing. You can actually go to our city website, and it has all of our contact information on there. I also have a city council Facebook page, Erica Brown, City Council District 6. And that really is, I just, use that to post updates and things that are going on in the city. But if you're, wanting to have a discussion or a meeting, that sort of thing, my email is spartanburg6@gmail.com, but that information is also on our city website,
which is cityofspartanburg.org.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. We had one more question, but I do see that we are at time. So what I'll do is because this is a good question coming from a student, so I'll copy that question and email it to both of you. And if you could respond, I can send it to the student if that works for us. So as we close for tonight's session, I do want to take the time to uplift my colleagues on the Wofford College 2021 Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Celebration Committee for their efforts in this year's celebration. So that would include Dean Taifa Alexander, Ian Brown, Brianna Dogan, Park Faison, Angela Filler, Isaiah Franco, Dr. Boyce Lawton, Marshall McDill, De'Aaron McGowan, Sarah Milani, Olivia Miller, Kia Kaiser, Tatasia Robinson, Lee Smith, Dr. Tasha Smith-Tyus, Jesselyn Story, and Toria Teemer. I also want to extend a special thank you to the Office of the Provost at Wofford College. Thank you all for attending tonight's session. I look forward to seeing you all at the remaining of the scheduled events for this week. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was terrific.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.